We are lucky and happy to have this occasion. Mr. Heaney has been in Toronto at an international poetry festival and found it possible to come down and read for us. And I'm grateful for that, as I'm grateful for his work. There have been 4 books, none of them, alas, published in this country. Death of a Naturalist, 1966. Door into the Dark, in 1969. Wintering Out, in 72. And the most recent one, North, this year. From the beginning, these poems, I think, had the not so common but unmistakable mark that poetry as a vocation confers. Mr. Heaney's handling of our language had and gave a sense of solidity, mass, contour, edge, a good deal like the sense that it conveyed of the things and creatures of the farm world in Derry that was embodied in the early poems. And with each new book, the poems have grown stronger in verbal accomplishment and in imaginative depth. So that one has, in the most recent ones, bare, powerful, solemn ordering of words on the page. And the poems have gone wider and deeper with each book, deeper into our personal past, a local past, then into the past of Ireland, and finally into something more mysterious still, or something very old, deeps in the life of North Europe. I think the latest poems include a number that are really considerable and beautiful works of art, acts of imagination. And in a world in which, a world I sometimes think is a world of half-written poems, these are wholly written. Seamus Heaney grew up and went to college in Northern Ireland and taught for some years at Queen's University in Belfast. In 1970 and 71, he was at Berkeley. He now lives in County Wicklow, south of Dublin, and teaches at an educational college in Dublin. He's been honored in this country, and rightly, and most recently by the award of the E.M. Forster Award of our National Institute of Arts and Letters last May. And his latest book, the one published in England this year, The North, will be published in January in this country by Oxford University Press. I'm delighted to welcome him here at Hillis for this reading.
I am honored by the introduction, and I'm grateful to be invited here. And since I'm here, I may as well get on with the business of reading the poems. And I think I'll just read them in chronological order, the full gamut from A to C. Except the first one, I would like to read it from the third book. It's a very, very short little clearing of the poetic throat, as it were, just. It's called Oracle. It imagines a child in a hollow tree. It imagines the hollow as a kind of a throat, simply. And the child is a little uvula. It's a child hiding. Hide in the hollow trunk of the willow tree. It's listening familiar. Until, as usual, they cuckoo your name across the fields. You can hear them draw the poles of stiles as they approach, calling you out. Small mouth and ear in a woody cleft, lobe and larynx of the mossy places. Shakespeare put it much better. In Act 1, Scene 1 of Timon of Athens, the poet speaks about his own processes and says, our poesy is as a gum which oozes from whence 'tis nourished. The fire i' the flint shows not till it be struck. Our gentle flame provokes itself, and like the current flies each bound it chafes. It's very risky to quote that kind of thing in the middle of your own reading, but I think it's really everything. So I go back to a book called Death of a Naturalist and read a poem called Death of a Naturalist, which was described by a reviewer in the Irish Times once as a long, disappointing poem about frogs. And it's not long. And it's about frogs, all right. There's possibly one word in it, two words perhaps, that you might say something about, or just explain. Townland is just a district in the countryside. It's nothing to do with towns, really. It's more to do with land. And a little part of the countryside. And a flax dam is a trench where the flax crop is rotted, or technically speaking, retted, before it goes on its way to become linen eventually. So this is a true story. It happened. It's told, set down. One of the first things that I put down that gave me some confidence. Death of a Naturalist. All year the flax dam festered in the heart of the townland. Green and heavy-headed flax had rotted there, weighted down by huge sods. Daily it sweltered in the punishing sun. Bubbles gargled delicately. Blue bottles wove a strong gauze of sound around the smell. There were dragonflies, spotted butterflies. But best of all was the warm, thick slobber of frog spawn that grew like clotted water in the shade of the banks. Here, every spring, I would fill jam-potfuls of the jellied specks to range on windowsills at home, on shelves at school, and wait and watch until the fattening dots burst into nimble swimming tadpoles. Miss Walls would tell us how the daddy frog was called a bullfrog, and how he croaked, and how the mammy frog laid hundreds of little eggs, and this was frog spawn. You could tell the weather by frogs too, for they were yellow in the sun and brown in rain. Then, one hot day when fields were rank with cow dung in the grass, the angry frogs invaded the flax dam. I ducked through hedges to a coarse croaking that I hadn't heard before. The air was thick with a bass chorus. Right down the dam, gross-bellied frogs were cocked on sods. Their loose necks pulsed like sails. Some hopped. The slap and plop were obscene threats. Some sat poised like mud grenades, their blunt heads farting. I sickened, turned, and ran. The great slime kings were gathered there for vengeance, and I knew that if I dipped my hand, the spawn would clutch it. I once read that on the third program of the BBC. It was produced by an English poet called George Macbeth, the program. And he says, "You're very good on rot." Stick to rot. I ended up being entranced by preservation, luckily, but more of that later. This is another little rot poem. It's a straightforward telling of blackberry picking blackberries and having them rot. Late August, given heavy rain and sun for a full week, the blackberries would ripen. At first, just one, a glossy purple clot, among others red, green, hard as a nut. You ate the first one, and its flesh was sweet like thickened wine. Summer's blood was in it, leaving stains upon the tongue and lust for picking. Then red ones inked up, and that hunger sent us out with milk cans, pea tins, jam pots, where briars scratched and wet grass bleached our boots. Round hayfields, cornfields, and potato drills, we trekked and picked until the cans were full, until the tinkling bottom had been covered with green ones, and on top big dark blobs burned like a plate of eyes. Our hands were peppered with thorn pricks, our palms sticky as bluebeards. We hoarded the fresh berries in the byre, but when the bath was filled, we found a fur, a rat-grey fungus glutting on our cache. The juice was stinking too. Once off the bush, the fruit fermented, the sweet flesh would turn sour. I always felt like crying. It wasn't fair that all the lovely canfuls smelt of rot. Each year, I hoped they'd keep, knew they would not. This is another poem that requires absolutely no introduction. It's just the words themselves telling their little story. Some quatrains goes A, B, A, B. However, in my lumbering reading, you may miss out those points or pointers. It's called Follower. It's very simple, just about child following his father, father following the child. My father worked with a horse plough. His shoulders globed like a full sail strung between the shafts and the furrow. The horses strained at his clicking tongue. An expert, he would set the wing and fit the bright steel-pointed sock. The sod rolled over without breaking. At the head rig, with a single pluck of reins, the sweating team turned round and back into the land. His eye narrowed and angled at the ground, mapping the furrow exactly. I stumbled in his hobnailed wake, fell sometimes on the polished sod. Sometimes he rode me on his back, dipping and rising to his plod. I wanted to grow up and plough, to close one eye, stiffen my arm. All I ever did was follow in his broad shadow round the farm. I was a nuisance, tripping, falling, yapping always. But today, it is my father who keeps stumbling behind me and will not go away. Well, that's the daddy. I suppose you should put in an auntie at this point. This is just a woman baking bread in the house who was an aunt of mine. And again, it's just trying to remember it. It's called Sunlight. It's a woman carrying the baking bread on a griddle in the afternoon. There was a sunlit absence. The helmeted pump in the yard heated its iron. Water honeyed in the slung bucket, and the sun stood like a griddle cooling against the wall of each long afternoon. So, her hand scuffled over the bakeboard. The reddening stove sent its plaque of heat against her, where she stood in a flowery apron by the window. Now she dusts the board with a goose's wing. Now sits, broad-lapped, with whitened nails and measling shins. Here is a space again, the scone rising to the tick of 2 clocks. And here is love, like a tinsmith's scoop, sunk past its gleam in the meal bin. I just stay in that country with a slightly different edge to it. This is also a sunlit afternoon, but a member of the police force has called in. The police were a fearful presence I suppose they're a fearful presence to any youngster, but they're rather more fearful to a Catholic youngster in the north because the police were Protestants. These are ugly words, I know, but the way people talk in north of Ireland. They were a kind of paramilitary police force. They were armed. I suppose they were ordinary enough men, but a uniform changes anybody, and especially in the eye of a child. So this is, I like to play with William Wordsworth's version of himself. Fair seed time had my soul, and I grew up, fostered alike by beauty and by fear. So there's a little touch of the fearful fosterings here. A constable calls. His bicycle stood at the windowsill, the rubber cowl of a mud splasher skirting the front mudguard, its fat black handle grips heating in sunlight, the spud of the dynamo gleaming and cocked back, the pedal treads hanging relieved of the boot of the law. His cap was upside down on the floor next his chair. The line of its pressure ran like a bevel in his slightly sweating hair. He had unstrapped the heavy ledger, and my father was making tillage returns in acres, roods, and perches. Arithmetic and fear. I sat staring at the polished holster with its buttoned flap, the braid cord looped into the revolver butt. Any other root crops? Mangels, marrow-stems, anything like that? No. But was there not a line of turnips where the seed ran out in the potato field? I assumed small guilt and sat imagining the black hole in the barracks. He stood up, shifted the baton case further round on his belt, closed the Domesday book, fitted his cap back with 2 hands, and looked at me as he said goodbye. A shadow bobbed in the window. He was snapping the carrier spring over the ledger. His boot pushed off, and the bicycle ticked, ticked, ticked. I suppose in some ways that is scratching the surface of something, or stirring the bottom of it. This is called Requiem for the Croppies. It's a voice out of the ground just. The Croppies were the name given to the insurgents who rose against I suppose, English rule in 1798, in the year of liberty, having learned these revolutionary ideas from America and France. And I needn't go into a history lesson on the thing at all, but they, as you know, or would expect, were defeated and savagely put down. And in a sense, Irish republicanism it was born before that. There was a great deal of intellectual ferment, kind of secular political ideas involved, but it was also mixed in on a religion, a territorial religion, a whole mystique of the country, coming from the Irish tradition. And when the blood was spilled, of course, the thing got bonded together more. And the blood that was spilled in 98 in some ways guaranteed 1916 and guaranteed the foundation of the Irish Republic. So in 1966, which was 50 years after 1916, of course, you have a date like this, not unlike it yourselves coming up, I think. Every poet in Ireland was straining to celebrate 1916. And I had a notion of the usual grandiose thing of doing a big poem about 1798, a narrative thing, telling about these fellows. And then I read one little image that summed it all up, so I just used that image. It's just an image of resurrection. The Croppies, as they were called, they wore their hair short instead of long to signify their revolutionary intent. They carried grain in their pockets when they were on the run. And then they were buried in a common grave after that. And the barley grew up out of the grave. That's the whole poem, really, but I may as well try and put it this way. The pockets of our great coats full of barley. No kitchens on the run, no striking camp. We moved quick and sudden in our own country. The priest lay behind ditches with the tramp. A people hardly marching, on the hike. We found new tactics happening each day. We'd cut through reins and rider with the pike and stampede cattle into infantry, then retreat through hedges where cavalry must be thrown. Until on Vinegar Hill, the fatal conclave. Terraced thousands died, shaking scythes at cannon. The hillside blushed, soaked in our broken wave. They buried us without shroud or coffin, and in August, the barley grew up out of the grave. This is another voice out of the ground, this time a woman. Or at least it's a female voice. I don't know whether it's a woman or not. It's called Undine. It's one of the few poems that in some ways grew out of just the sound of the word itself. I always liked the grunt in it, and at the same time the tenderness somewhere in it too. Dean. Dean. If you went on with that, Dean, you could get all kinds of rhythms going too. There was a fashion for sound poetry, which always seemed to me a tautology, but there was a thing called sound poetry going around in the 60s in London. I'm sure it probably was on the go here too, but the basic principle was you got a good sound like Undine, and then you just played it out like Undine, 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 and so on. Well, I unfortunately got entangled with the meaning behind the word also, and an Undine is a water nymph, sprite, spirit, who has to marry a human being and have a child by him before she can become human, before she gets a soul. So that was an entrancing enough explanation of the word. And then somehow it got mixed into a little orphaned memory I had of seeing a man clearing out drains in a field, clearing out old rusty water and grass out of a clogged drain, and watching the water discover its own patterns and clearing itself out on the bottom, making its own little channels. It's the kind of thing you notice, I think, when you're smaller, because you are literally about 3 or 4 feet nearer the ground and you're much more interested in what's going on there. But this got mixed in with Undine and a man digging drains in the field and so on, and the voice comes out of all of those elements. Undine. If I'm reading this poem sometimes in a convent school, or I say it's a myth about agriculture, which it could be too. He slashed the briars, shoveled up grey silt to give me right of way in my own drains, and I ran quick for him, cleaned out my rust. He halted, saw me finally disrobed, running clear with apparent unconcern. Then he walked by me. I rippled and I churned where ditches intersected near the river, until he dug a spade deep in my flank and took me to him. I swallowed his trench gratefully, dispersing myself for love down in his roots, climbing his brassy grain. But once he knew my welcome, I alone could give him subtle increase and reflection. He explored me so completely, each limb lost its cold freedom, human, warm to him. In a sense, that poem was an epithalamion. Now, this is a little poem called Night Drive, which is just about driving at night. You will have noticed the oblique relationship between the titles and the poems in these cases. And it's driving from the north of France to the north of Italy, and it just plays with the image that every schoolboy and girl knows, that Italy is like a big leg. And this poem came out of, I'm glad to say, driving to see my wife in northern Italy. Night drive. The smells of ordinariness were new on the night drive through France. Rain and hay and woods on the air made warm drafts in the open car. Signposts whitened relentlessly, Montreuil, Abbeville, Beauvais, where promise came and went, each place granting its name's fulfillment. A combine groaning its way late bled seeds across its work light. A forest fire smoldered out, one by one small cafes shut. I thought of you continuously, 1,000 miles south, where Italy laid its loin to France on the darkened sphere. Your ordinariness was renewed there. I understand there's revolt against stanzaic form and process, so I will now read a free verse poem. I don't know whether it's free verse or just chopped iambics or chopped prose. It's called Wedding Day, and I don't know what American weddings are like, but certainly at many weddings I have attended in Ireland, there is more grief, little shocks of tears around at a wedding than you get at the average funeral. It's a kind of little songs of innocence and experience, those tears are, I suppose. Anyhow, my own wedding was no exception, and I commemorated it thus. I am afraid. Sound has stopped in the day, and the images reel over and over. Why all those tears? The wild grief on his face outside the taxi. the sap of morning rises in our waving guests. You sing behind the tall cake like a deserted bride who persists demented and goes through the ritual. When I went to the gents, there was a skewered heart and a legend of love. Let me sleep on your breast to the airport. And since we've had an aunt and a daddy, we'll better as well get a mammy now. This is called Mother of the Groom. It's just a little cameo to go beside that. This woman has been the mother of many grooms, and she's sitting listening to the usual thing, welcoming the bride into the family. She'll be one of ourselves. We're gaining a sister. We aren't losing a son. She's heard it all before. Mother of the groom. What she remembers is his glistening back in the bath, his small boots in the ring of boots at her feet. Hands in her voided lap, she hears a daughter welcomed. It's as if he kicked when lifted and slipped her soapy hold. Once, soap would ease off the wedding ring that's bedded forever now in her clapping hand. These poems are very short and breathless, but just think of them as shorts in the drinking sense. This is called Limbo. Again, it's a case of no marriage this time, I think. It's based on a rather shocking news report that was in the Irish Press. That's the name of the paper in Dublin. In 1969, that the body of an infant had been found in salmon nets, where fishermen were fishing for salmon in the estuary of the River Erne. There was clearly an illegitimate child that had been cast into the river further up. So this poem landed, and it ended up with an image of limbo, which I suppose is a state of spiritual free fall. And it's just called Limbo then. And imagines limbo as an estuary with cold gleams of fish. Fishermen at Ballyshannon netted an infant last night along with the salmon. An illegitimate spawning, a small one thrown back to the waters. But I'm sure as she stood ducking him tenderly, till the frozen knobs of her wrists were dead as the gravel, he was a minnow with hooks tearing her open. She waded in under the sign of her cross. He was hauled in with the fish. Now, limbo will be a cold glitter of souls through some far briny zone. Even Christ's palms, unhealed, smart, and cannot fish there. I'll read a poem called Act of Union. This is going backwards. This is a pregnancy poem. It imagines Ireland and England, the British Isles, on the map, like a man and woman in bed. Or it imagines a man and woman in bed, like Ireland and England on the map. I think it's more man and woman in bed. But the wife is lying with her back to him, pregnant and resentful. And he's lying like England, with his feet in Cornwall and his hands up in Shetland Islands, smoking and looking at the ceiling, perhaps. And over the centuries, she has turned on him and kicked him and screamed, and the usual thing. And he has been bewildered, really. He says, "What the hell's wrong with you? Didn't I give you everything you got? Your lovely Dublin Georgian architecture, your best writers, Shaw, the Anglo-Irish." Anyway, thing is that Ireland was indeed entered by England, possessed by England, had an act of union forced upon it, forced marriage in 1800, was withdrawn from by England, and was left pregnant by a kicking life in the north of Ireland that was fathered by the English seed on Mother Ireland's ground. Anyway, act of union. This begins, the man speaks it, and begins to speak just as the baby begins to move. Tonight, a first movement, a pulse, as if the rain in Bogland gathered head to slip and flood, a bog burst, a gash breaking open the ferny bed. Your back is a firm line of eastern coast, and arms and legs are thrown beyond your gradual hills. I caress the heaving province where our past has grown. I am the tall kingdom over your shoulder that you would neither cajole nor ignore. Conquest is a lie. I grow older, conceding your half-independent shore, within whose borders now my legacy culminates inexorably. And I am still imperially male, leaving you with the pain, the rending process in the colony, the battering ram, the boom burst from within. The act sprouted an obstinate fifth column whose stance is growing unilateral, his heart beneath your heart, so war drum mustering force, his parasitical and ignorant little fists already beat at your borders, and I know they're cocked at me across the water. No treaty, I foresee, will salve completely your tracked and stretch-marked body, the big pain that leaves you raw like opened ground again. We're staggering gradually towards relevance. But I would like to get into the bog for a while, Bogland. All the rest of the poems are kind of one poem. Maybe this poem I wrote in 1968. I had been teaching a course in American literature as far as was within my powers to do so. I've been reading about it, and I'd been reading about the prairie and what it meant in mythological terms, as it were. And I realized that there was no prairie in Ireland, but we have bogs. In a sense, if you have direction without depth, we have depth without direction. And this poem literally is one of the kind of poems you're grateful for. It just fell out. Once the first line came, and it doesn't happen very often. So, Bogland. It has great capacities, powers, and qualities. It preserves things that fall into it. If you go around the National Museum in Dublin, you will find that most of the material heritage of the country was found in a bog. And it also preserves butter and human flesh and weapons, and jewels, and wood and leather, things like that. And it's like the people themselves in many ways. Everything that falls in there is stored, and nothing is forgotten, nothing decays. We have no prairies to slice a big sun at evening. Everywhere the eye concedes to encroaching horizon is wooed into the cyclops eye of a tarn. Our unfenced country is bog that keeps crusting between the sights of the sun. They've taken the skeleton of the great Irish elk out of the peat, set it up an astounding crate full of air. Butter sunk under more than 100 years was recovered salty and white. The ground itself is kind black butter, melting and opening underfoot, missing its last definition by millions of years. They'll never dig coal here, only the waterlogged trunks of great firs, soft as pulp. Our pioneers keep striking inwards and downwards. Every layer they strip seems camped on before. The bog holes might be Atlantic seepage. The wet center is bottomless. This is the same thing. There's a reference to victims in this. I was entranced to find a book called The Bog People by the Danish archaeologist P.V. Glub, I understand his name. And one of the things that is most important in that book is the find of a man called the Tollund Man, of which more hereafter. But he was strangled and buried in the bog. But this is just a little litany of praise for the ground itself and the kind of ground it is and how it's formed, indeed. Just running one's fingers through the bog. Kin by hieroglyphic peat on a spread field, to the strangled victim, the love nest in the bracken. I step through origins like a dog turning its memories of wilderness on the kitchen mat. The bog floor shakes, water cheeps and lisps as I walk down rushes and heather. I love this turf face, its black incisions, the cooped secrets of process and ritual. I love the spring off the ground, each bank a gallows drop, each open pool the unstopped mouth of an urn, a moon drinker, not to be sounded by the naked eye. Quagmire, swampland, morass, the slime kingdoms, domains of the cold-blooded, of mud pads and dirtied eggs. But bog, meaning soft, the fall of windless rain, pupil of amber, ruminant ground, digestion of mollusk and seed pod, deep pollen bin, earth pantry, bone vault, sunbank, embalmer of votive goods and sabred fugitives, insatiable bride, sword swallower, casket, midden, flow of history, ground that will strip its dark side, nesting ground, outback of my mind. This center holds and spreads, sump and seed bed, a bag of waters and a melting grave. The mothers of autumn sour and sink, ferments of husk and leaf deepen their ochres. Mosses come to a head, heather on seeds, brackens deposit their bronze. This is the vowel of earth dreaming its root in flowers and snow, mutation of weathers and seasons, a windfall composing the floor it rots into. I grew out of all this like a weeping willow, inclined to the appetites of gravity. Well, I'm afraid it's not stopped yet. This is another voice out of a different bog. It's a woman who was discovered in County Armagh, a ritual burial. And the people had some instinctive notion of where she came from because they called her the Viking Queen. Although they were probably spoke Irish in South Armagh at that time, and the word for Viking is just a kind of a general word for a foreigner anyway. But as it turned out, Glub connects her with the other Scandinavian burials. But she's just, in this poem, she's a voice remembering her own seclusion and her own long lie under the peat. She was dressed like a queen with a crown and so on, but it all crumbled when it was brought out. And she's, in some ways, she's just the feminine principle on the ground, in the ground. Mother Ireland or Kathleen New Houlihan or whatever. I lay waiting between turf face and domain wall, between heathery levels and glass-toothed stone. My body was braille for the creeping influences. Dawn suns groped over my head and cooled at my feet. Through my fabrics and skins, the seeps of winter digested me. The illiterate roots pondered and died in the cavings of stomach and socket. I lay waiting on the gravel bottom, my brain darkening, a jar of spawn, fermenting underground dreams of Baltic amber. Bruised berries under my nails, the vital hoard reducing in the crock of the pelvis. My diadem grew carious. Gemstones dropped in the peat flow like the bearings of history. My sash was a black glacier wrinkling. Dyed weaves and Phoenician stitchwork retted on my breast's soft moraines. I knew winter cold like the nuzzle of fjords at my thighs, the soaked fledge, the heavy swaddle of hides. My skull hibernated in the wet nest of my hair, which they robbed. I was barbered and stripped by a turf cutter's spade, who veiled me again and packed cum softly between the stone jams at my head and my feet, till a peer's wife bribed him. The plait of my hair, a slimy birth cord of bog, had been cut, and I rose from the dark, hacked bone, skull wear, frayed stitches, tufts, small gleams on the bank. I read the poem about that Tollund Man. All of him that is now preserved is his beautiful head. It's very peaceful, very benign, very mild. And in this Bog People book, there are various photographs of corpses of ritually, violently killed people who have been preserved in the peat. And these photographs of murders between neighbors, as it were, killings between neighbors as part of the way of life, naturally, they called up other photographs of, especially photographs I had seen in a book called Guerrilla Days in Ireland when I was very young. I was about the War of Independence in Ireland. And there were photographs there of reprisals that had been taken by black and tans on houses. And you see farmer and son who had been pulled out of their bed about 6 in the morning, one sock on and one sock off, the shirt tail out, shot with a little trickle of blood lying on his front step. And somehow this ordinary and yet horrible, terrible, and ritualistic almost violence, I don't know, I tried to refract it through the Tollund Man. And the poem is just a kind of a prayer, I suppose, and an attempt at appeasing myself, at least. And it has some images of just the normal barbarisms, like tying brothers behind a railway trolley and pulling them down the rails, and that kind of thing. Tollund Man is in 3 short sections. Someday I will go to Aarhus to see his peat-brown head, the mild pods of his eyelids, his pointed skin cap. In the flat country nearby where they dug him out, his last gruel of winter seeds caked in his stomach. Naked except for the cap, noose, and girdle, I will stand a long time. Bridegroom to the goddess, She tightened her torque on him and opened her fen, those dark juices working him to a saint's kept body, trove of the turf cutter's honeycombed workings. Now his stained face reposes at our house. I could risk blasphemy, consecrate the cauldron bog, our holy ground, and pray him to make germinate the scattered, ambushed flesh of labourers, stockinged corpses laid out in the farmyards, telltale skin and teeth flecking the sleepers of 4 young brothers trailed for miles along the lines. Something of his sad freedom as he rode the tumbril should come to me, driving, saying the names Tollund, Graubal, Nabalgord, watching the pointing hands of country people, not knowing their tongue. Out there in Jutland, in the old man-killing parishes, I will feel lost, unhappy, and at home. I'll read 3 more. It's getting near the end. People wonder if you're going to go on all night if you don't give them some warning. This is my last bog lady. She was discovered under a stone in Jutland with rods surrounding her. And she had her head shaved. So this evidence squares with Tacitus's account of how the Germani treated their adulteresses. So Professor Globe has come to the conclusion, and I agree with him, that she was an adulteress, perhaps. But she also reminded me, because of the color of her face, if nothing else, which had become black, and her shaved head, of tarring and feathering in Belfast and Derry, of the punishments that are handed out by the community to those who violate its mores. So again, it's a bit of refraction going on, I hope. Somewhere lurking behind it is Christ's word to the woman, to the people around the woman taken in adultery. He who is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone. And there was a lot of righteous indignation at that time about the girls being tarred and feathered. But the poem will have to do itself. I'll not go into sociology. Punishment. I can feel the tug of the halter at the nape of her neck, the wind on her naked front. It blows her nipples to amber beads. It shakes the frail rigging of her ribs. I can see her drowned body in the bog, the weighing stone, the floating rods and boughs, under which at first she was a barked sapling that is dug up, oak bone, brain firkin, her shaved head like a stubble of black corn, her blindfold a soiled bandage, her noose a ring to store the memories of love. Little adulteress, before they punished you, you were flaxen-haired, undernourished, and your tar-black face was beautiful. My poor scapegoat, I almost love you, but would have cast, I know, the stones of silence. I am the artful voyeur of your brain's exposed and darkened combs, your muscles webbing, and all your numbered bones. I who have stood dumb when your betraying sisters, called in tar, wept by the railings, who would connive in civilized outrage, yet understand the exact and tribal, intimate revenge. This is called Funeral Rites. It just imagines a big funeral. It's going from Belfast in the north of Ireland to a place called Newgrange, which is a great necropolis of great system of megalithic tombs on the River Boyne, halfway down the country. And to get from Belfast to the Boyne, you have to pass through a pass which is known as the Gap of the North. And when you're passing near the Gap of the North, you're passing near a loch called Carlingford Loch, and out on your west as you go down is Strangford Loch. Both of these names, signs of the Viking connection, as it were, in Ireland. The poem is, I don't know, it's just a sorrowful thing. But the image that ends it comes from a Viking saga, Icelandic saga, Njal saga. As Auden said in Letters from Iceland, their literature is all about revenge. The saga is halfway through, and this attractive hero, Gunnar, has been killed, hasn't been revenged or avenged, is lying in his burial chamber, and the men going past outside one night have a vision of him lying with the lights burning in the chamber, and Gunnar is happy. He's lying appeased. And it's a very curious moment because it's a glimpse of the notion of forgiveness or appeasement in the middle of all this revenge. And of course, the glimpse is only a glimpse. The real thing continues, killing. But that's where it ends up. And the first part is a recollection of wakes, just going into the house where the corpse is, going through little rituals of courtesy, as it were. The second imagines the funeral, just driving along, and the third ends it. Funeral rites. I shouldered a kind of manhood, stepping in to lift the coffins of dead relations. They had been laid out in tainted rooms, their eyelids glistening, their dough-white hands shackled in rosary beads. Their puffed knuckles had unwrinkled, the nails were darkened, the wrists obediently sloped. The dulce brown shroud, the quilted satin cribs. I knelt courteously admiring it all, as wax melted down and vaned the candles, the flames hovering to the women hovering behind me. And always in a corner, the coffin lid, its nail heads dressed with little gleaming crosses. Dear soapstone masks, kissing their igloo brows had to suffice before the nails were sunk and the black glacier of each funeral pushed away. Now as news comes in of each neighborly murder, we pine for ceremony, customary rhythms, the temperate footsteps of a cortege winding past each blinded home. I would restore the great chambers of Boyne, prepare a sepulchre under the cup-marked stones. Out of side streets and by roads, purring family cars nose into line. The whole country tunes to the muffled drumming of 10,000 engines. Somnambulant women, left behind, move through emptied kitchens, imagining our slow triumph towards the mounds. Quiet as a serpent in its grassy boulevard, the procession drags its tail out of the Gap of the North as its head already enters the megalithic doorway. When they have put the stone back in its mouth, we will drive north again, past Strang and Carling fjords. The cud of memory allayed for once, arbitration of the feud placated. Imagining those under the hill disposed like Gunnar, who lay beautiful inside his burial mound, though dead by violence and unavenged. Men said that he was chanting, verses about honor, and that 4 lights burned in corners of the chamber, which opened then as he turned with a joyful face to look at the moon. Finally, this poem is called Exposure. It was written in County Wicklow in December 1973. County Wicklow is in the Republic of Ireland, as you know. It's not in the north, not in Ulster, not where the killing is happening most. But I lived in Belfast until 72, in and out of it. Like everybody else there, found it normal enough. People can get used to anything. And yet, for various reasons, ended up in County Wicklow. One of the reasons being a search for the meaning of what you took on yourself when you were prepared to say that you were a poet, which I think is a very serious business. And in a way, I was trying to find that out. But you never find that out, I don't think. But I was very uneasy about vague guilt about leaving when the crunch was there, and yet knowing that nothing you could do about it. And thinking about the function of poetry and politics and all that. And as I wrote the poem, at the back of my mind, there was a Russian poet, Mandelstam. Was it Mandelstam, who's a pure artist, and who, for one little epigram against Stalin, of course, was put into the labor camps and eventually died there. But the thing about Mandelstam is that it's not the little epigram against Stalin that means a thing, really. It is the purity and potency of his own work itself. And I came to the conclusion, in a way, that poetry has to be itself, and then it can't be reckoned with, can't be stopped. And it has to proceed, arrogate to itself some kind of authority for itself. I had Mandelstam in my mind. I had also a couple of people that I knew as friends who were in internment camps in the north. And there was I sitting on my ass writing poems in Wicklow. And at the time the poem was written, there was a comet coming and going in the sky. Remember, did you have that comet here which disappeared and then turned up again? So, okay, it was Exposure. It is December in Wicklow, alders dripping, birches inheriting the last light, the ash tree cold to look at. A comet that was lost should be visible at sunset, those 1,000,000 tons of light like a glimmer of haws and rose hips, and I sometimes see a falling star. If I could come on meteorite. Instead, I walk through damp leaves, husks, the spent flukes of autumn, imagining a hero on some muddy compound, his gift like a sling stone whirled for the desperate. How did I end up like this? I often think of my friends' beautiful prismatic counseling and the anviled brains of some who hate me, as I sit weighing and weighing my responsible tristia. For what? For the ear? For the people? For what is said behind backs? Rain comes down through the alders. Its low, conducive voices mutter about letdowns and erosions, and yet each drop recalls the diamond absolutes. I am neither internee nor informer, an inner émigré grown long-haired and thoughtful. A woodcairn escaped from the massacre, taking protective colouring from bole and bark, feeling every wind that blows, who, blowing up these sparks for their meagre heat, have missed the once-in-a-lifetime portent, the comet's pulsing rose. Thank you very much.